Welcome to Airplay Escape. Please consider subscribing to my Patreon account for the full audiobook. Thank you for your support. Hogwarts, Joestar's Wild Journey to Become the Wizarding World's Strongest. Episode 21. Joshua took a step forward, and the 5 evil dogs who overturned the alley subconsciously took a step back, which was completely different from their aggressive situation just now. At this time, as soon as the offensive turned, the onlookers were even happier, so that they would not care who was deflated now, and they could bring themselves a little fun. They are like indifferent spectators in the ancient Colosseum of Rome, and whenever there is a bloody and violent incident, it can make their adrenaline pump. The dogs whispered and changed formations, and the 5 of them formed a small ring-shaped circle back to back, making sure that there were people in every direction to watch, thinking that this would prevent Joshua's ghost from disappearing. Joshua smiled. Such a formation would only make them look more stupid. The pentagram seemed to be well defended, but the density of attacks was relatively reduced. Unlike just now, as soon as the 5 of them fired magic in a volley, Joshua had to stop and give himself a chance to escape. For Joshua, who has the ability to stop at time, if he has any long-range attack method, he can kill the 5 people on the opposite side at will. But unfortunately, he didn't, and his only magic explosion hadn't been in his hands for a long time, and he hadn't practiced a few times, and the range was only a pitiful distance from the arm to the tip of the wand, and even he would be blown up when launched. In a hurry, he used time and stop, leaving aside the time to run over and close the distance. At most he could only let the platinum star throw a few punches, and there was no way to subdue these 5 people in an instant. So Joshua had to find an opportunity, a little closer to them, to find a suitable place. This distance must allow him to calmly stop time, throw his wand into the circle of the 5 of them, and then allow Joshua to safely evacuate the blast range for the rest of the time. To explain in game terms, it is to first find an opportunity to break into the past, and then use the shockwave brought by the magic explosion to knock them away and control them, and finally the platinum star, which is the main output force, can enjoy as much as you like. Oiler up. Maybe you're thinking, what will I disappear? And when will it appear? Not sure how deep your opponent's strength is too deadly in a wizard duel, so you will now shrink into a ball, like a shivering hedgehog. Joshua slowly walked an arc around the 5, constantly narrowing the distance between them. But in my opinion, it's ridiculous, as the guys who watch the show say, I'm just a stinking child, and it's really ugly that you guys are scared into this just because I showed a hand of magic you never knew. Although words do not directly help the direction of the battle, these can be inserted into their hearts like steel knives, slowly prying their psychological defenses. Joshua kept a relatively safe distance, circling them, taunting them with words. Anyone should be in awe of the mysterious, but there are always exceptions. When a person is carried away by the blood, even if there is an abyss ahead, they will rush up without hesitation. Joshua made up a sweet fruit with sarcastic words, and the shouts of the melon-eating crowd around him helped the fruit grow, and the vicious dogs that were used as prey would rush up like moths to the fire, and everything was under control. I can't stand it. Now I want to tear this little guy's mouth apart. Douglas was indeed the breakthrough, and Joshua put more energy into him when he taunted them, especially describing his chase with him at that time, portraying a stupid cat who wanted to tease a little mouse but was stupid and silly alive, causing onlookers to laugh. His friends also know his violent temper. The clay man still has 3 points of anger, has been scolded like this, and still can't be a person? In the future, when I looked up in this overturned alley, I didn't look down and saw it, and when I met the neighbors, I said, yo, isn't this a stupid dog fivesome who was shown to be a fool by that little brat? Don't want face? Huang Mao still compromised, and whispered to the people around him, well, since you can't bear it, don't bear it. When I count 1, 2, 3, let's take out our wand, shout a spell at random, and use the phantom to transform behind him, hit him by surprise, and then it will depend on whether he runs first or our fists hit him in the face first. 1, 2, 3. As soon as the 3 words came out of the yellow-haired man's mouth, the 5 people instantly pulled out their wands, aimed at Joshua and casually shouted a spell. This really startled Joshua, and he quickly took half a step back to avoid their spell shooting, but in the next second, the 5 of them disappeared in unison and appeared beside him. The 5 people who appeared out of thin air surrounded Joshua, did not give him a chance, and just punched Joshua straight. The general combat style of this punk is not magical at all, but it works unexpectedly. The fists of the 5 people were about to smash into Joshua's face, and a flash of panic flashed in his eyes, but it was replaced by a touch of ecstasy. Isn't this the right middle? Smash Varudo. Time stops here. Episode 22. 1 second has passed. Joshua shrugged his palms at the 5 people around him. Their fists were already close to his face, which was already a fast fist speed for ordinary people, but this was nothing to himself who had a platinum star. As long as his mind moved, he could start and stop. Their idea is certainly great, teleporting in a circle to prevent themselves from running away, although it looks as stupid as the defensive form just now, but it is really good against ordinary people. But is Joshua an ordinary person? Obviously not. Time passes 2 seconds. Joshua had to think hard about how to resolve the battle with a little arrogance. Let the platinum star beat them up with Oiler? Or do you want to throw a spell and run away now? 3 seconds have passed. Joshua was lost in thought. The difficulty of choosing made him feel a little uncomfortable, both of which seemed good, but now he had to make a choice. Time passes 4 seconds. Or use magic. A substitute that was beyond the wizard's knowledge was bound to cause all kinds of commotion, and Joshua chose to extend his wand in his hand to be on the safe side and chant the spell lightly. But amazingly, the white light spots brought by the void explosion actually froze in midair after appearing, like a white dandelion flying quietly in the sky. 5 seconds have passed. There was no time to consider the surprise caused by the void blast. Joshua hurriedly let the platinum star stomp on the ground, using the anti-shock force transmitted to his body to take himself flying, and realized. Ladder clouds? Time. Start flowing. Ha ha ha. Brat. You eat me this. The overturned alley dogs began to laugh maniacally, but there was no one in front of them, and their fists hit their own people. And Joshua, who had already soared into the sky, took advantage of their bodies when they swung their fists to naturally pounce forward, stomped down, stepped on the head of one of them and continued to jump forward. This is not the end. Douglas sadly found that the white light spot in front of him was inexplicably familiar. Be careful. This thing is. Time would not give him a chance to continue the explanation, and the white point of light suddenly tightened, turning into a little black hole in Douglas's eyes, and the small hole collapsed, contracted, stared at in nothingness, and then explode. The 5 people were blown away by the strong shock wave 3 or 5 meters away, and Joshua, who was gliding in the sky, took advantage of this air wave to fly for a while, turned over in the air with his small size, and came to a perfect landing with his back to the 5 people, and how to get a score of 9.999 on the gymnastics field. It's now. Joshua silently counted 3 seconds in his heart, a beautiful reflexive face of the 5, learning the Jojo of Jotaro Sanchiao, stretched out his finger and pointed at the vicious dog Fivesome who fell to the ground. Yay. Douglas clutched his chest, and the black robe had been torn open several times, revealing the bloody wound inside, looking extremely miserable. If it weren't for the explosion triggered by that little white light that happened in front of their eyes, they couldn't believe that it was caused by a young wizard who was only 11 years old. Without the protection of the iron armor curse, anyone could not eat such a powerful magic blow head-on, and the combat effectiveness of the 5 evil dogs in the overturned alley was directly reduced by several percent. How? Happy? I have to make a move. Joshua felt extremely comfortable at the moment, thinking that yesterday he was a little boy worried about the future, but now he has the ability to knock 5 adults down head-on. Well, the premise is that they have to stand still as their own living target. The 5 people who collapsed on the ground dared to be angry and did not dare to speak, for fear that Joshua would awaken some strange idea of mending the knife, so they could only unwillingly lower their heads, and did not even dare to look at Joshua with their eyes. Power makes people happy, but it can also make people lose themselves. Joshua clearly felt that his body was now active everywhere, and the excited blood rushed down his heart to all parts of his body, and this burning sensation like fire seemed to ask him to make another big fuss. I'm going to slip away quickly. The sight of the surrounding people has faintly had a bit of a bad meaning. Hitting people on other people's territory is not a good signal, while the deterrent power of the platinum star is still there. Quickly slip away. The moment Joshua walked out of the overturned alley, the platinum star that had been quietly following Joshua dissipated, but at the same time, the long-lost system prompt also came out. Congratulations to the host for completing the mission, obtaining a Dementor immunity, and oversized missions. Abilities can be randomly selected once in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Episode 23. In summary. There is still no Oiler. Coming out of the overturned alley, Joshua sighed. After all, it was too weird for people to be shot out of thin air, so he could only use it for a while, and did not dare to let the platinum star punch Oiler. But it's been a great harvest. Joshua looked at his system interface and nodded with satisfaction. Come on, draw the card and worry about the card. When you have the opportunity, hurry up and use. Stop thinking about pumping skills when the disaster is about to happen like the last time. But the question is, it is said that a random selection of abilities, how is this calculated? How can my void blasting have 2 skill descriptions? I know Louise of the Zero Demon, and Megumi who offers her blessings to a better world. But this skill must be explained to me. Didn't roll, the system simply replied to Joshua. I have this time to ask the system better to see the skill introduction. Also, the random abilities drawn in JoJo. Maybe the stand-in ability of JoJo through the ages. Oh? Is there a platinum star? Joshua, who had just used the Platinum Star experience card, couldn't help but brighten his eyes, and he didn't want to go when he stopped on the side of the road. Yes and yes, even you can draw the world of Diota. The system drew a big pie for Joshua, of course, for the all-round development of the host's moral, intellectual, physical, and aesthetic work. This system also puts other abilities in it. Joshua suddenly sensed something was wrong. For example, the Ripple Qigong that Diqiao practiced. For example, Air Qiao's ability to drive a vehicle, passive. For example, the ability to paint on the shore. For example, the knowledge of Xiqiao Dongfang to help comb the nose of the plane. For example, Jotaro Sanjo's knowledge of oceanography. For example, Dio's legal knowledge. Oh yes, since Diota was born in the 19th century, this legal knowledge may be a little backward. So the pedestrians on the road saw a mad little wizard frantically banging his head against a tree on the side of the road. What the hell is this? Even if Diqiao's ripple skill is forgotten, it is also something that normal humans can cultivate, and with that I can go to the name of the strongest human without learning magic. Even if you have the ability to draw, the knowledge of oceanography, and the knowledge of law, you can at least be a decent person in Muggle society. But what is the ability of Air Qiao and For Qiao? Do you want me to comb the head of the plane to fly the plane? I'll say goodbye to bicycles in this life, right? Air Qiao claims to sit on what he sinks. Young man, you were born in Dunhuang in your previous life, right? Which so many murals? In the end, can it be smoked? Draw, why not smoke? He still has to vomit when he complains, and he still has to smoke the card, no matter what he draws. If you draw Air Qiao's posture vehicle ability, it is a big deal not to play Quidditch, and if you draw For Qiao, or it's not bad to comb Harry Potter with an airplane head. The system gave Joshua a roulette wheel, which spun quickly with a flick. Bless and bless. God help me draw a substitute ability. I am the Emperor of Europe, I am the Emperor of Europe. A little attack power will be done, even if it is not the ability of the protagonist. System prompt, the host has drawn Magician Red, English is Magician, derived from tarot cards. The image is the bird-headed man, a stand-in for Muhammad Abdul, the main character of the third part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. A card with a red bird-headed man with a muscular brother appeared in Joshua's hand, turning into a beam of light and rushing into his body in the gaze of a silent Joshua. Joshua blinked his eyes. It's over? Only. Gave me a magician red? Yes, it's called a magician, you're a magician, it's just called a different name. The compatibility between the host and the stand-in is quite good, and the attack power is not weak. The key is that the attribute is fire that fits the host's wand. It can increase the power of the corresponding attribute magic. The system honestly explained to Joshua, but it made him a little uncomfortable. Just experienced the power of having the platinum star. When it stopped, it seemed as if the world was in hand, and now he has such a magician's red. Joshua scratched his head and clicked open his attribute bar. Trainee little wizard, scum who hasn't gone to school yet. Spell, Void Blast, Thunder and Fire composite attribute, Destruction power B medium to high, range D 2 feet, cast speed C average. Other abilities, Magician Red, with Fire attribute magic enhancement, Destruction and speed and persistence of B, Precision and speed of C, growth. Since the host itself is not old, the growth is improved to B. But at the same time, because the host's strength is too poor, it is impossible to summon the complete body of the Magician Red, and at best, it can only summon a small flame. It's still okay to warm your hands. Episode 24, Eat Me Magicianard, Joshua shouted, and then a flame appeared out of thin air behind him, and out of the flames came a tall birdman covered in red. I saw that this birdman was full of tight muscles, a strong body, his right leg and knee were slightly bent, and his arms were closed in front of his chest to make a strong and healthy pause. After a vicious battle, Joshua and his Magician Red defeated their opponents and won the praise of their opponents. The brother behind you is so powerful. Then Joshua separated his legs in a figure of 8, stretched out his thumb for liking with his right hand at his waist, and said to the enemy, if you want to use magic to win wizards, it's still 10 years early. Wow. It's shameful to die just thinking about it. Joshua covered his face and didn't know what to say, not to dislike how to dislike the Magician Red. After all, it can increase his magic power very well in his hands, but whether strong or not is a momentary thing, but handsome or not is a lifelong thing. Want to replace Jo family lineage, the person who is not a substitute for the cool hanging sky. All of them are muscular men. How did they become birdmen here? Doesn't the great Cosmic will admit that he is a JoJo? Suffering from loss and loss, Joshua walked back to the leaky cauldron, obviously only spent less than an hour in Diagon Alley, but now it seems like a dozen episodes in the novel, huh? How many episodes? What a metaphor this is. Shaking his head to put all the unrealistic thoughts behind him, he first found Tom, the bar owner, in the back kitchen, and asked him if anything had happened when he left. Old Tom grimaced, actually, it's not a big deal. It's that Ginny's little girl keeps saying if you ran away. Nothing else. It's just what? Boss, don't whet people's appetites. Actually, Mr. Arthur brought back one. I heard Mrs. Molly say that you missed the train, didn't you? Old Tom wanted to stop talking, and the expression on his wrinkled face was actually a little sympathetic. Blessed are you, child. After saying that, he shook the towel on his shoulder and slipped away like a fleeing disaster. There must be a situation here. Joshua was frightened by old Tom's words, and stood a little confused in the doorway, and the noisy sound in the bar hall mixed with the jingling of work in the back kitchen filled Joshua's ears. Sorry, please let me. A waiter passed Joshua with a plate and accidentally bumped into him. Forget it. Regardless of who he is, could it be that Fudge, the Minister of Magic, can still follow Mr. Weasley over to eat? Sticking out and shrinking the head is also a knife. Let's go. Joshua rushed into the bar. The hall was noisier and hotter than when he left. I don't know if it was lunchtime. The diners ordered a steaming lunch to warm the tavern. At this time, the bar was wide open, and it seemed that Tom, the owner, wanted to get some air. But the tables near the gate were already full, and they were stunned that they didn't let much of the heat out of the store. The smell of food and alcohol mixed in the store, and after getting used to it, Joshua found that these smells were not so unbearable, or was it simply that he was hungry and had automatically ignored the smell of alcohol that he hated? My big night code words are starving to death. At the bar, Joshua saw his table where, as Boss Tom had said, Mr. Weasley had arrived, and he sat next to Mrs. Weasley and talked intimately with his wife. Little Lori Ginny looked desperate. There was a large pudding in front of her, but her mother sitting next to her firmly held her hand and did not move the tableware. Next to Ginny was her own seat, empty, and one to the right, the mysterious figure that Mr. Arthur had brought back, who happened to have his back to Joshua and didn't know who he was. Joshua inexplicably felt that there were few people at his table, and even some new wizards deliberately bypassed the area, leaving a circle of empty tables, like a separation belt, separating his table from the bar. At the same time, Ginny, who had been sullen, finally found Joshua standing at the bar and quickly waved to him, with the intention of being self-evident. Come back quickly. I'm still waiting to eat the pudding. Mrs. Weasley saw Joshua at Ginny's reminder, bowed her head to her husband and said something, then smiled slightly and told Joshua to sit down quickly. Joshua and Mr. Weasley nodded, pulled out their chairs, and sat down. It's a bit like a business meeting rather than a simple dinner with friends and family. I'm sorry, but I've spent a little more time in Diagon Alley. Joshua turned his head, ready to introduce himself to the mysterious man beside him. By the way, I don't know this yet. Crouch. You're not. Instructor. I want to go to school. Joshua probably knows why people in the bar don't want to take their seats this way. In a restaurant, I met my teacher from many years ago. Will it come up silly? At least Joshua won't. Episode 25. So try not to do such a thing as cheating. I obviously have been reviewing and typing recently, and I can basically pass the exam by writing everything I know, but I was greedy for a while. I put the cheat sheet under the roll. I didn't even look at it, then GG, and now a roommate is back. The reason is that the person who turned out to be sitting in his place hid a cheat sheet. The teacher just let him roll. Recently, I am not in the mood because of the exam code word, a little water. Let's be considerate. I will continue to improve my writing ability. Well, read more about the big guy's article. Well boy, we will not refuse any of the little wizard's desire to go to school. Even if it's from a muggle background. Joshua looked up pitifully at the lady who looked a little helpless. Is that so? Professor McGonagall? Can I really go to Hogwarts? Yes. After all, we can all feel the presence of magic in your body, and there is no doubt that you are a little wizard. The expression on the lady's face was a little embarrassed. For the first time in her teaching career, she had seen someone doubt her eligibility to go to school. I saw the little children who were accustomed to skipping class and did not like to study, but now they suddenly met such a type. The painting style is strange, and they almost knelt down for themselves when they met. What is this? The world is crazy? Do you give cats as bridesmaids? Still in disbelief, Joshua turned to look at the Weasleys. Mr. and Mrs. Arthur knew that they needed a little encouragement after the ups and downs of life, so they nodded to Joshua, while Ginny was a little confused, thinking about something. Why did this little brother suddenly look at me? However, after seeing that her parents nodded, little Loli also nodded quickly, although there was no encouragement at all. This really relieved Joshua, although the system gave him a little wizard qualification, but what if the school doesn't recognize it? After all, I am a fake, who has not received an admission notice, got into Hogwarts and then laughed at? Or pat Filch on the shoulder and say, hey, big brother. In a few years, you will be able to retire with peace of mind. I'll take your place. It's a disaster to think about. The lady sitting next to Joshua, looking helplessly at the fairy, was the vice headmaster of Hogwarts, the head of Gryffindor, the transfiguration teacher, and Professor Minerva McGonagall, who is 70 years old this year. Her black hair was tied into a high bun and she wore a bright green robe, and according to the original description, she always showed people with a very stereotypical expression, but she was not so serious. At least much better than the head of the teaching department of those middle-aged bald Mediterranean greasy uncles Joshua had seen in his previous life. Raise your hand, young wizards with such a teacher. Joshua. What the hell are you doing? We've been waiting for you for a long time. Ginny was upset with the belated Joshua, but was immediately gagged by Mrs. Weasley. Mr. Weasley touched his nose, which seemed to have just arrived, and his nose and ears were a little red from the wind. You're Joshua, Molly said, right? I'm Molly's husband, you can call me Mr. Arthur. He was a little nervous, not knowing if he was irritated by Joshua's treat. You don't need to introduce this one next to you, right? I know you by the way you look. The vice headmaster of Hogwarts. Professor McGonagall. It just so happened that she was dealing with some things at the Ministry of Magic today, and she came with me when she heard from you." Professor McGonagall nodded at Joshua and said to him with a pleasant face, "Kid, can you explain to me what happened? To be honest, this is the first time this has happened in so many years since I taught. If it's because of the school, it might cause big trouble." Joshua didn't know what to say. How did he know that Professor McGonagall would come with him? Some of the words used to excuse the Weasley family cannot be taken out casually. System prompt: the host needs to tell a big lie to cover up the existence of this system, otherwise everything is GG, but don't worry, because the host perfectly completed the last task, has the opportunity to successfully resist a Dementor or Dementor, do not have to worry about being read. That. Didn't I have an enrollment letter? I don't know the exact departure time, so I just missed it. Joshua rolled his eyes and spread his hands at Professor McGonagall, making a pitiful look. What? No letter of admission? Professor McGonagall's brows furrowed, and she couldn't help but keep a tight stare at Joshua, but. As far as Molly said. Child. Are you Muggle-born? Mrs. Weasley said in amazement, but. There's something wrong with that, right? It is impossible to know the location of platform 9 3/4 without a notice, and Joshua is indeed a little wizard. The atmosphere at the table suddenly became tense. As we all know, Hogwarts is a magical school. It has a wonderful way to test the magical qualifications of children of school age all over the country, and then send Hogwarts letters through the OWL network all over the country, and those who receive the letter can happily prepare things to go to Hogwarts. There is no need to talk about pure blood and half-blood wizards. There are people in the family who are easy to do, and the wizard can know it at a glance. But the trouble is that Muggle-born wizards have a hard time talking about the occult to someone who grew up in a new age. After all, magic does not exist in everyone's subconscious. Therefore, in order to ensure the source of students, the teachers of Hogwarts had to take the trouble to plant a spell on it when confirming the letter sent to Muggle parents, so that people would unconsciously trust him when they saw the letter. Otherwise, who would believe you? Let's say Hermione in The Three Little Strong, her parents are dentists, and a well-educated middle-class family will trust you on a thin piece of paper for no reason. It's like you're walking unscrupulously down the street, and then suddenly a strange guy wrapped in black cloth pulls you into the alley, sneaks out a stack of things from inside your clothes, and says to you, "Old iron, cereal no? Wife Loli Deong Ma, brother and noble and support her, everything, simple and cheap and sufficient, save a smoking money, self-home power generation is as cool as a fairy, do you want good things, hey?" It seems like the lines are pronounced incorrectly. The real lines are, "Lao Tai, I see that you are brilliant in skeleton and talent, and you are a good seedling who cultivates magic among the best. How about it? Now I have an acceptance letter from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. You can go there to learn magic as long as £9.15. For such people, will you believe it?" Of course not. So in fact, the admission letter is actually a very important thing. Without that, you don't know the existence of the wizarding world. Without that, you can't reach Diagon Alley. Know that. You don't know that you can't get to Hogwarts on platform 9 3/4. So the question is, how did Joshua know that he was a little wizard? How did he get to the platform 9 3/4? How? Anyway, it's a big deal. Episode 26. Kid. Can you tell me how you know about Hogwarts? Professor McGonagall's face was not gentle at the moment, and there was already a trend towards the middle-aged strict teaching director. Seeing that the situation was not good, Mrs. Weasley hurriedly rounded Joshua. Don't be so serious, Minerva, look at you scared the child. That. I don't have that stuff. When I was only 7 or 8 years old. Joshua forcibly calmed down, pinching his thigh with his hand under the table, letting the pain focus his attention. I followed my parents on a trip to a foreign country. On the way, I met an old man with a white beard, and he didn't know why he saw me the same, saying that I was gifted and skeletal. It was a cultivation wizard who was one of the best, so he gave me a little magical enlightenment and let me know the existence of the wizarding world. It's a pity that he came and went in a hurry. Just told me that if I want to continue to refine magic, I have to go to a regular magic school. He asked me to come to platform 9 3/4 on this day of the year, and I came as promised. But I didn't know that Hogwarts textbooks were bought by students themselves. I knew I would have asked him a few more words. Although Mr. Shurchin died a tragic death, his words were quite useful. Always be elegant and unhurried. That's why Joshua was able to calm down under Professor McGonagall's substance-like scrutiny. Lie. Oh? No invitation letter delivered to your home? An old bearded gentleman told you about the wizarding world? Is it convenient to tell me about his appearance? Professor McGonagall frowned, realizing that things were not simple. Yes. If Professor McGonagall knew about him, I would like to ask you to thank him for helping me. I don't remember exactly what he looked like now, I just remember that his name was Gandalf. Joshua launched the Tosaka family training again, forcibly turning himself into a poker face. If you can find it, there will be a ghost. Although Joshua has never seen the Lord of the Rings in his past and present lives, This does not mean that he cannot pull the tiger skin and pull the flag. Gandalf. Gandalf. Professor McGonagall narrowed her glasses, searching her memory for such a white-bearded old man. All right. Since you were introduced by someone, forget it. I will arrange to check the notice. Even if this matter is over, everyone should not mention it again. Mr. Arthur is also an old Cho who has been in the Ministry of Magic for many years, so naturally he knows what it means to buy Professor McGonagall, and hurriedly beckons everyone to eat, as if he is a treat. Old Tom was still quite good at doing things after receiving the money, enough to serve a table of dishes. A large pot full of cream stew was placed in the center of the table, and there was a bunch of strange dishes on the side, and Joshua, a faking countryman who only ate his own cooking all year round, also recognized only one national dish, the so-called fish and chips, fish and French fries. Everyone picked up knives and forks and took only the food they needed. Although the taste of these dishes is okay, and the frequency of knives and forks clashing on the dinner plate is also proof that everyone's appetite is good, the atmosphere is unusually awkward, which is a little out of place with the noisy scene in the bar. Fortunately, everyone can detect this strange atmosphere, and the speed of eating has unconsciously become a lot faster, and the dishes on the table have been cleaned up in a few clicks. It's just that Ginny still seems to be a little dissatisfied, burps slightly, and wants to do something about the remaining piece of pudding on her plate, but the movement is seen by her mother next to her, grabbing her small palm that she wants to move, and her eyes warn her not to act rashly. Ginny couldn't resist, so she timidly withdrew her hand and watched as the waiter took away the plates on the table one by one. So, now that there's nothing going on, Professor McGonagall wiped her mouth with a napkin, which was the grace of the 8 classics, much better than Joshua's gobbling up. Mr. Joshua Joestar? Professor McGonagall asked, and Joshua nodded quickly, pretending to be a good baby. Let's go to Hogwarts now. Episode 27. Tomorrow Kamahara. I have to copy notes nervously, obviously open the volume, but I can't bring a book. Toxic Bar 0. Let's go to Hogwarts now. Professor McGonagall said to Joshua. The group packed up their salutes and walked to the door of the leaky cauldron. Mrs. Weasley and Ginny didn't say anything, but Mr. Weasley was a little in love. Oh. Joshua, sorry for not doing anything for you. Mr. Arthur shook Joshua's hand in a friendly manner, his face slightly drunk and a little slurred. Our family was even invited to lunch by you. It's nothing. Joshua smiled slightly. To be honest, I'm glad that your wife and daughter are willing to pay attention to me, a cornered little wizard, not to mention that I'm not already going to Hogwarts now. Mr. Arthur was even more embarrassed, and let go of Joshua's hands for a while, not knowing what to say. Oh yes, my youngest son happens to be in the first year of Hogwarts this year, his name, Ron. It's a little red-haired boy with freckles on his face, about the same height as you. Ginny spoke first, finishing for her father. Ginny. Don't be so rude. Mrs. Weasley was very unhappy with Ginny's performance, and slapped her lightly on the head as a punishment. But yes, we have a lot of children at Hogwarts, and this year the third son, Percy, happened to be the prefect of Gryffindor. If you have any problems when you get there. Well, Molly, Professor McGonagall interrupted Mrs. Weasley helplessly, if I hadn't known Percy's nature, I might have thought you were instigating our excellent Mr. Prefect to give Joshua power for personal gain. Mrs. Weasley was stunned, then laughed scoffinously. How can this be? Instead of worrying about Percy, I should worry that Fred and George will take Joshua badly. In order to show her presence, Ginny also said on the side, that's it, I also heard Brother Fred say that he once blew up the women's toilet and took out the toilet ring inside to sell. Joshua, you must not learn from them. What can Joshua do? I can only smile awkwardly as a foil. But Professor McGonagall looked at her. Really? Ginny? I don't know about this kind of thing, but since you said so. I'll tell Mr. Filch about it when I get back. Ginny consciously pouted, and in order to avoid losing too many words, she quickly closed her small mouth. But if I check the truth of this matter, when you enter Hogwarts, I'll add 10 points to your house. Professor McGonagall's words made little Laurie smile again. There are rewards and punishments. I will directly deduct Fred's kid 20 points when I go back, so that he and George know to converge a little. I don't want to deal with the trouble they do anymore. At least half of what Mr. Filch complains about every week is caused by these two boys. Professor McGonagall looked serious. This score -1+ is very fun. That is, Arthur and his wife are embarrassed. The classroom teacher criticizes his naughty children in person, but also reasonable, so the two had to secretly make up their minds that when the holiday is over, they must teach those two melons a lesson, so that they know what mixed doubles are. Well, if they dare to resist, then call the eldest son and second son, who are working outside, and play taboo quadruple beatings for them. Bidding farewell to the Weasleys, Joshua walked outside the bar with his salute and Professor McGonagall, when the cold wind whizzed outside, making Joshua a little uncomfortable. So Professor, how do we get to Hogwarts? Is it transfiguration to the train with a phantom? I remember that apparition transfiguration was not allowed in Hogwarts. Not really. Professor McGonagall nodded approvingly. Hogwarts doesn't allow the use of apparitions, that's right. But there are exceptions to everything, such as, like house elves? Joshua took over the conversation, hoping to brush up a little more favorability in front of Professor McGonagall. Yes, house elves have a different magic system than wizards and can use phantom transfiguration within the school limits. Of course, as a school teacher, I also have this privilege, Professor McGonagall said to Joshua, grab my robe and bring your salute. Hold your breath, I take you to phantom and transfiguration. Joshua grabbed Professor McGonagall's robe and closed his eyes. Oh. The air made a strange sound, which reminded Joshua of the bubblegum he blew when he was 5 years old, and it was this sound when the thing was blown, and that thing directly made our young Joshua walk on the ghost door, and the paste on his face could not be picked off, and he almost went into the ninefold earth house to meet Satan. Alright. Kid, you can open your eyes. Episode 28. I didn't finish the exam today. Come home tomorrow. Cuckoo. Angelica, I'll go to the principal to report work. You are here, don't move around. Professor McGonagall took Joshua to Hogwarts at once. However, this is not the main teaching area. It looks like an abandoned wooden house on the edge of a wild forest. Professor McGonagall paused for a moment and shouted into the cabin next to her, Hagrid. Hagrid out. Here's something for you. Joshua subconsciously looked over to the wooden house, and out of it came a tall giant. Oh, Professor, you will find me something. You know, this is my last vacation. I'm ready to have a drink at this time. The giant has a beard, obviously the whole head is surprisingly large, but only a little of the outline of his face is ruby as Hagrid, the caretaker ape of the Forbidden Forest in Harry Potter and a part-time farmer. Huh? How can there be a little guy here? Hagrid is so tall that when he looks down at Professor McGonagall, he finds Joshua standing beside him all the time. I remember that the train should not have arrived at school by now. How many cases are this? Joshua hurriedly said, Because all sorts of things happened. Professor McGonagall, go first, and I'll explain my business to this Mr. Hagrid. Professor McGonagall shook her head helplessly. Okay, that's it, Mr. Joestar, you'll be in charge of receiving first-year students when the time comes. As for your salute, I'll let the house elves move away. See you in the evening. The two hurriedly said goodbye to Professor McGonagall. Or sit in the house first? It's weird cold outside. The two people, one big and one small, stared outside for a long time, and finally Hagrid spoke first. Joshua followed Hagrid into the tall, oversized wooden house, and the first thing he saw was the oversized bed in the corner of the room and the umbrella almost his own height leaning against the corner. The fireplace facing the door burned wood of unknown materials, bringing excessive warmth to the cottage. To be honest, every item in the room was more than a size larger than the same items he had ever seen. God forbid, Joshua had never seen a chair that needed to bounce to sit on. Hagrid's official height is 4.8 meters. Are you young and should not drink bars? So pour you some coffee. Hagrid handed Joshua a cup. You wait, I'll go find some snacks. He didn't ask Joshua who it was, and seemed much more enthusiastic than the Weasleys. Joshua held the cup in both hands, stuck his head into the cup, and licked a little thick coffee, perhaps because of the addition of enough sugar. The taste of the coffee did not feel coarse. Well, you read that right, Joshua stuck his head in. Hagrid's cup is also surprisingly large, and maybe it's better to call this thing a jar. Hagrid placed the plate containing the black object on the edge of the fire, and the flame fluttered upwards, but some of the black objects that did not touch the flames did not move. This is a rock skin cake I made, with raisins on top, and it tastes good. Seeing that Joshua seemed very emotional about this thing, Hagrid opened his mouth to explain, and by the way, he took a piece from it, put it in his mouth and bit off a large piece to show that he was not bad. Joshua was naturally curious, reached out and took a piece, secretly pinched it hard, but he couldn't break even a little slag. It is said that French long bread can be used to knock people sticks. So Joshua hid the cake on his body and said, "This thing looks very delicious, I want to take it back and taste it." Hagrid listened with praise and asked Joshua to take a few more to his future roommate. Joshua was very moved, and then rejected Hagrid's offer to give this thing to his roommate, fearing that I would not have to be friends in the next few years. But then again, boy. How did you follow Professor McGonagall to the school? Shouldn't the little wizards all come on the express train? It's hard to do. Hagrid had an immature idea in his mind, saying that Professor McGonagall had been widowed for so many years. Where do you want to go? Joshua smiled helplessly. I had a little problem and didn't catch the train. Thanks to Mr. Weasley's family and Professor McGonagall, I was able to come here to study. Hagrid's eyes were so wide that they were about to burst out of their sockets, and an old face was about to turn purple, but he still forcibly held back his smile and swallowed back the laughter that had stabbed his throat with his hand. This big man really doesn't hide his mood very well. Joshua indignantly buried his head in the vat. How to relieve his worries. Only coffee. Episode 29. Yesterday the plane was late, not to mention, there was still fog on the way home, the visibility was only about 10 meters, and the drive of a little more than an hour was more than 2 hours. I could only use a speed of about 20 kilometers per hour to slowly grind on the road, and then I ran into a big truck, discussed with the driver, and several of our cars followed the people, which was a little faster. The whole team was the same. Time flies, and I see the sun sink like it flies. The morning time is as long as 28 episodes, but the afternoon time seems to be consumed in just one sentence. This must be God's conspiracy, Joshua thought as he looked at the gloomy sky outside the window. However, this afternoon was not without gains, at least he collected Hagrid for the after. He became a friend, and even with Hagrid's big black dog teeth about the same height as Joshua, he was also familiar with Joshua, although there is a bit of Hagrid's silly big heart in it. But in fact, in general, Hagrid is not bad, that is, sometimes the tone is not very strict, the ideas are too naive, and it is easy to brag and pout, but the flaws are not hidden. Still acceptable. Look at this time, it's almost there. Hagrid finished the drink in his cup and burped so much that he almost didn't kill Joshua. Let's go, Joshua, let's go to meet the newcomers instead. Oh, I forgot that you're also a first-year freshman, but it's not a big problem, and you know that I'm in charge of the reception of first-year students. Just follow me now, find the first-year students at the train station, and blend in as if nothing happened. Joshua rolled his eyes. It was a little difficult for him to walk too swaggering from behind Hagrid to the crowd, and to be honest, it would be a little embarrassing. Following Hagrid out of the tuba cabin, Joshua walked toward the college area amid the reluctant barking of his teeth. You may be a lucky little wizard. Hagrid deliberately walked in front of Joshua to block the cold wind blowing. Know that the first thing every young wizard who comes to Hogwarts does is follow me and take a boat from the big lake in front of the house area. Joshua raised his eyebrows, although he knew that there was such a plot, it was quite difficult to understand. So, why? Is it for students to know the surroundings of the Great Lake beforehand? That's not true. This is modeled after the scene when the 4 great wizards who originally founded the school arrived at Hogwarts. It should be to let the children experience the spirit of the 4 pioneers at that time, the blue wisp of the road, and founded Hogwarts. Hagrid said a rare scene, and then he turned back to Joshua and said quietly, by the way, when I came, I occupied a boat alone. That taste is so cool. If you can, you should try to find a boat with fewer people, or simply find a boat with more girls, on your boys' terms. How could Joshua be interested in a big bearded face squeezing his eyebrows in front of people? I could only stunned and said something. I'm still young, women only affect the speed at which I pull out my wand. I don't want to think about this kind of thing at this age, and used this kind of words to prevaricate Hagrid, so Hagrid's bold laughter echoed throughout the grass, startling countless resting birds in the Forbidden Forest. The train station is not far from the lake, and now you can see the shadowy platform lights from far away. But Hagrid led Joshua down a path that was difficult to walk around and about, but fortunately Hagrid helped him not to fall. Joshua calculated in his mind, and Hagrid probably led himself around the lake. I want to ask the system to search the surrounding environment, and this thing says that he is afraid of the dark and strikes. When the two reached the platform, it was completely dark, and there was not a single star in sight in the dark night sky. There was no one in the small platform at this time, but the lights inside were eerily lit, and the cold wind whizzed through the empty platform with the sound of the wind and the bleakness, which was like suddenly breaking into the wizard station that had not fallen for thousands of years. Well, although it has indeed been passed down for thousands of years, it is indeed the territory of wizards. The train is about to arrive. Remember not to get too close. That thing is so tight. I don't know why if you get too close to it, you can't help but want to get close to it, but none of the evil curses above are really strange. Hagrid kindly gave Joshua a little advice from his seniors. Oh. That's so good. It's so weird. Joshua wondered if he could explain physics to him, so he responded awkwardly, but how long do we have to wait from here? Don't worry, Joshua, don't wait long. Hagrid patted Joshua on the shoulder, using a little more force, and Joshua felt a few centimeters shorter now. As he spoke, the whistle of the train was heard in the distance, followed by a bright light with a loud sound that gradually moved here. That was the Hogwarts Express that Joshua missed. Remember, don't follow the upperclassmen. Hagrid said to Joshua, now he was going to work. Episode 30, Harry and Ron took off their coats and changed into black robes. Ron's robe was a little shorter, revealing his sneakers underneath. The train will arrive at Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on the train and we will take you to school for you. The voice echoed on the train, and I didn't know whose it was. Harry was so nervous that the contents of his stomach turned up, and he saw that Ron's face turned white under his freckles. They stuffed the rest of the candy into their pockets and poured forward with the flow of people in the aisle. The train slowed down and finally stopped. Passengers pushed and shoved towards the doors and descended to a small, dark platform. The cold of the night made Harry shiver. Then a lamp flickered above the students' heads, and Harry heard a familiar voice shouting, First-year students, come here. Harry, come over here, how are you? Ahem, borrow from. Harry was delighted to find his old acquaintance Hagrid inside the platform, waving to him. Oh? Do you know Hagrid? I heard Fred and they said that Hagrid was the caretaker of the Forbidden Forest at Hogwarts, and he was a very nice person. How did you know him, Harry? Ron was a little surprised by Harry's reaction and asked him, well, but it looks like there's someone next to Hagrid who seems to know him well. Harry said, Hagrid, you and I are obviously only separated from you for half a month, why did you find a new love? Just kidding, how could Harry know so much at such a young age? Oh. Harry, how does it feel to be at Hogwarts? Hagrid looked at Harry, who had changed into wizard robes, and nodded with satisfaction, which was not the same as the thin and helpless little boy he had seen for the first time, at least a little more energetic. Felt Oklahoma. Harry nodded. He always felt that the little boy standing behind Hagrid had seen him before. Was it an illusion? Hagrid laughed, frightening some of the little muggle wizards who didn't understand the wizarding world and slipped away from him. Well, I'll talk about the old days later. Well. The red-haired little guy. I remember Fred and George's two stinky boys saying they had a youngest brother. Ron rolled his eyes helplessly. His two living brothers wouldn't even stink their own image, right? Oh, that's me. I'm Ron Weasley, that's it. I happen to have a little guy here. Hagrid slapped Joshua on the back, almost knocking him down. You guys get to know each other, I'll go count the number. Joshua was hit hard and forced to stand up, looking at the two peers in front of him who looked at him with surprise, and touched his nose. My name is Joshua Joestar, and you're Ron, right? Thanks to your family's care, huh? Me? My family? Ron didn't turn his mind for a moment, pointing to himself with a blank look. What's going on? Harry remembered what had happened to him, and said, Is it difficult? Did you follow Mrs. Weasley's instructions before crossing platform 9 3/4? Joshua was a little embarrassed. I missed the train, huh? The two people were stupid on the spot, and attracted the attention of the people around them. It's just a little late. Then I just didn't get on the train, but thanks to your mother, I got Professor McGonagall. Joshua whispered, afraid that others would laugh at him if they heard it. Harry shook his head subconsciously. Then you really. Now. All the little wizards in the first grade follow me. Watch out under your feet. Let's go this way. Hagrid shouted from the front of the platform, then led the little wizard behind him towards a dark path. Then let's go, let's talk on the way. Ron greeted Harry and Joshua and followed the troops. They followed Hagrid's slippery belt, stumbling, and seemed to be going downhill along a steeper and narrower path than Joshua had come. It was dark on both sides of the path, and no one spoke. Only a boy was heard to sniff once or twice once in a while. Turn this corner, you're about to see Hogwarts for the first time. Hagrid shouted back. This was followed by a loud "oh." A black lake suddenly unfolded at the end of the narrow path. On the other side of the lake rises a towering castle with spires and windows, twinkling under the stars. Each boat cannot exceed 4 people. Hagrid shouted, pointing to a fleet of boats moored on the shore. While the people in front were still on the boat, the three continued to chat. Oh, that is, you came late because something went wrong this morning? And then because there is no one to guide it. I didn't have time to get on the train. Harry and Ron said everything I said, each of them said a word and added a sigh, and at the end, they both stretched out their hands and patted Joshua on the shoulder. Brother, you are so miserable.